Okay, so picture this. You're at like a networking event, or maybe it's a friend's birthday party, and you find yourself facing that dreaded conversation lull. You know what I'm talking about? It's like you've exhausted all the small talk, and suddenly your mind goes blank, like searching for a life raft in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're diving into today, figuring out how to navigate those choppy conversational waters. And we've got some interesting source material for this. Someone who used to struggle with social anxiety, actually. But they discovered all these tips for keeping conversations flowing.
It's funny because what's really refreshing about their approach is that they don't shy away from the silence. They actually embrace it.
That's interesting, because usually silence is like the enemy of good conversation, right? But this person talks about how those pauses, they're not as dreadful as we make them out to be. In fact, most people probably don't even notice them as much as we think.
It's true. It's like that saying, you'd worry less about what people think of you if you realized how seldom they do. We tend to overthink it. We overestimate how much others are scrutinizing our every word.
Okay, that's good to remember. But how do you actually get comfortable with those pauses? It feels so unnatural to just stop talking.
That's where mindfulness can be really helpful. It's about shifting your focus away from those anxious thoughts. The thoughts about potential awkwardness. Instead of focusing on that, you try to just be present in the moment. Pay attention to your breath. Notice the sensations in your body. It's amazing how grounding that can be.
So it's like you're taking a mini mental vacation from the pressure of having to fill every second with words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what? Sometimes that pause can actually be a gift to the other person.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, it gives them a chance to jump in, share their thoughts, maybe even reveal something they wouldn't have otherwise.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're creating space for the conversation to breathe.
Precisely. Now, that doesn't mean you should aim for radio silence the entire time. It's all about finding a balance.
Yeah.
And that's where active listening comes in.
Our source talks a lot about active listening as this secret weapon for better conversations. But isn't listening just, hearing what someone is saying? How do you actively listen?
Okay, think of it like this. Most people don't explicitly state everything they're thinking or feeling.
Right.
Active listening is about tuning into those unspoken cues, those hidden questions behind their words.
Okay. Can you give me an example? I need a visual.
Absolutely. The source uses this really vivid example. Imagine someone tells you,
Yeah.
I cut my hand pretty badly last Sunday while working on my car.
Hmm.
Now, on the surface, that seems like a pretty straightforward statement, right?
Yeah, not exactly a cliffhanger. But I see where you're going with this. There's more to unpack there.
Exactly. Active listening is about digging beneath the surface. For example, you might ask, what kind of car were you working on? Or, wow, how did that happen? Or even, is your hand feeling any better now?
Oh, I see. So every statement is like a doorway to a deeper conversation if you know how to spot the right questions to ask.
And those questions show that you're genuinely interested. You're not just trying to fill the silence. You're expressing a desire to understand their experience. And that can be incredibly powerful in making someone feel heard and valued.
You know what's so cool about that example? It's like active listening helps you uncover these hidden threads in the conversation, like these little sparks of potential that you might miss if you're too busy thinking about what you're going to say next.
Yeah, it's like you're both archaeologists brushing away the dirt to reveal these hidden treasures of shared experience.
I love that analogy. It makes so much sense. Instead of dreading the silence, you're leaning into it, using it as an opportunity to dig deeper.
And you know what's interesting? Even like really mundane statements can become springboards for fascinating conversations if you approach them with that active listening mindset.
Okay, so give me an example. How can you turn something totally ordinary into something engaging?
Well, the source actually talks about this. They say even a simple question like, how tall are you, can spark a surprisingly interesting discussion.
Really? How so? I mean, it's not exactly a philosophical debate.
Right. But it's about going beyond the surface level. Instead of just getting like a numerical answer, you could ask, have you always been this height? Or are there any advantages or disadvantages to being your height?
Oh, I see. You're basically inviting them to share their personal experience of their height, not just the fact of it.
Exactly. And everyone has a story to tell. Maybe they were always the tallest kid in class. Or maybe they had to work extra hard to be taken seriously in a world that values height.
That's so true. It reminds me of this one time. Actually, you know what? We'll save that story for another time. But the point is, you're right. Even something as basic as height can be a gateway to a more meaningful conversation if you ask the right questions.
And that's the beauty of active listening. It helps you uncover those hidden pathways, those unexpected turns that make a conversation truly memorable.
Okay, so we've talked about embracing the silence, and mastering the art of active listening. But what about that fear of asking a stupid question? You know?
Yeah.
The kind that makes you want to disappear into your shoes.
Ah, yes, the dreaded stupid question. It's something we all fear. But this source actually challenges that notion entirely.
Oh, how so? Do they have some magical phrase that makes any question sound brilliant?
Not quite, but they ask a very thought-provoking question themselves. They ask, what even is a stupid question?
That is a good question.
Uh-huh.
I guess we all have this internal censor that tells us what's appropriate to ask and what isn't.
Exactly. And that censor often stems from a fear of judgment, of looking foolish or uninformed.
Which is funny because most of the time people are more interested in connecting with you than judging you.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. It's like this source is giving us permission to just be curious.
Absolutely. What they're suggesting is that curiosity, that genuine desire to learn and connect, it trumps any fear of judgment. If you're coming from a place of genuine interest, even a seemingly basic question can spark a fascinating conversation.
Okay, so how do you actually put that into practice? Like, how do you reframe that internal voice that's like, don't ask that, you'll sound dumb? It's about shifting your perspective. Instead of viewing a question as like a test that you might fail, you see it as an opportunity to learn something new. Embrace the fact that you don't have all the answers, and that's okay.
So instead of trying to sound smart, you're aiming to be genuinely curious.
Exactly. And that curiosity can be incredibly disarming.
Yeah.
It shows the other person that you're genuinely interested in them and their experiences.
I love that. It takes the pressure off of having to be, witty or clever and lets you just be present and engaged in the moment.
Precisely. And you know what? Not every question has to be groundbreaking or profound. Sometimes the simplest questions can lead to the most unexpected and rewarding conversations.
That's so true. I was reading somewhere that even small talk can be like a gateway to a deeper connection if you approach it with curiosity.
Absolutely. Think about it. How many times have you started a conversation with just a casual question about the weather or the traffic, and then suddenly you find yourself having this fascinating discussion about travel or local history, or even just a shared love for a certain type of coffee?
It's true. You never know where a conversation might go if you're open to the possibilities.
And that's what makes these tips so, liberating. They empower you to just navigate conversations with more confidence and curiosity, knowing that even those moments of silence or those seemingly basic questions can be opportunities for connection.
I love that. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into the art of conversation, I think it's important to acknowledge that not every conversation is going to be a home run. Right.
Oh, absolutely. And that's okay. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, a conversation just doesn't click.
Yeah.
Might fizzle out, or the other person might not be as receptive. And that's perfectly normal.
Right. It's like our source said earlier, don't water a dead plant. You can't force a connection.
Exactly. Sometimes the most graceful thing you could do is to recognize when a conversation has run its course and just bow out gracefully. It's about respecting your own time and energy as well as the other person's.
Okay, so as we wrap up, what are some key takeaways we can all carry with us from this deep dive into the art of conversation?
Well, I think first and foremost, remember that silence isn't the enemy. Embrace those pauses. Use them as opportunities to gather your thoughts and to really listen to what the other person is saying.
And when you listen actively. Don't just pay attention to the words, but to the unspoken cues, those hidden questions that can lead to deeper conversations.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. Embrace your curiosity. Even if a question seems simple or even stupid, ask it anyway. You never know where it might lead.
Yeah, it's like we're giving ourselves permission to be curious explorers in the world of conversation, open to new discoveries and unexpected connections.
I love that. And remember, not every conversation will be a roaring success, and that's okay. The important thing is to approach each interaction with that spirit of curiosity, openness, a willingness to connect.
I love that. Now, before you head off into your next conversation, we want to leave you with this final thought. If you could ask one unusual but genuine question to keep a conversation going, what would it be? Let that question simmer in your mind, and who knows, it might just lead to your next great conversation. Until next time, happy chatting.